First off, starting off, I just want to give a little brief introduction about myself. I think I know most people in the room, probably most people online. But if you don't know me, my name's Andrew Cheatle. I've been with Greencastle for about the past year now. Started off last November with a 6-month SkillBridge fellowship here. Worked for a few months at American Water, and then now spent a little time on the bench, starting as a W-2 back in April, and I've spent the last several months with Central Hudson doing budget control work. Today we're going to be talking about strategic procrastination, when waiting creates value. So as we go through this, I really want to challenge everyone. I know this can be a little controversial of a topic. So if you have ideas, if there's anything that I'm saying that sounds off to you and that you have an opposite viewpoint, please let me know. I really want to encourage good discussion, dialogue as we dive into this. So starting off, I have a video clip from a guy named Adam Grant. Some of you may have heard of him. He's an esteemed professor from the University of Pennsylvania. He's gone viral a few times for different TED Talks. That he's given on things about workplace efficiency, that kind of thing. This is a clip from one of the TED Talks that he has given. And this line that I have at the bottom here, I want everyone to keep in the back of your mind. He doesn't say it in this video clip, but it's later on, and it really gets to the crux of what we're going to be discussing today. And it's the idea that procrastination can be a vice for productivity, but a virtue for creativity. A little background context, because I had to cut the video clip down. He starts off by talking about how he self-identifies as being a procrastinator, meaning that when someone gives him a task, a challenge, a project, he does not delay, he gets after it immediately.
But this served me well in college, because I finished my senior thesis 4 months before the deadline. And I was proud of that. Until a few years ago, I had a student named Jihei who came to me and said, I have my most creative ideas when I'm procrastinating. And I was like, that's cute. Where are the 4 papers you owe me? No, she was one of our most creative students, and as an organizational psychologist, this is the kind of idea that I test. So I challenged her to get some data. She goes into a bunch of companies. She has people to fill out surveys about how often they procrastinate. Then she gets their bosses to rate how creative and innovative they are. And sure enough, the procrastinators like me who rush in and do everything early are rated as less creative than people who procrastinate moderately. So I want to know what happens to the chronic procrastinators. She's like, I don't know, they didn't fill out my survey. No, here are our results. You actually do see that the people who wait till the last minute are so busy goofing off that they don't have any new ideas. And on the flip side, the people who race in are in such a frenzy of anxiety that they don't have original thoughts either. There's a sweet spot where originals seem to live. Why is this? Maybe original people just have bad work habits. Maybe procrastinating does not cause creativity. To find out, we designed some experiments. We asked people to generate new business ideas. And then we get independent raters to evaluate how creative and useful they are. And some of them are asked to do the task right away. Others we randomly assign to procrastinate by dangling Minesweeper in front of them for either 5 or 10 minutes. And sure enough, the moderate procrastinators are 16% more creative than the other 2 groups. Now, Minesweeper is awesome, but it's not the driver of the effect. Because if you play the game first, before you learn about the task, there's no creativity boost. It's only when you're told that you're going to be working on this problem, and then you start procrastinating, but the task is still active in the back of your mind, that you start to incubate. Procrastination gives you time to consider divergent ideas, to think in nonlinear ways, to make unexpected leaps.
All right, as we move on, please keep that in mind in the back of your head, because again, that really is going to get into what we're talking about today. Starting off with our agenda, we're going to start off with the really cliche way of starting off any kind of presentation by defining our terms, make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And we're going to talk about the social perception that we all know, how we hear the negative connotation that goes along with procrastination. Then we're going to talk about that negative procrastination and tips for it. So we are going to start off by addressing that if you are the kind of person who's susceptible to that kind of procrastination, some tips to be effective in overcoming that. Then we're going to talk about a corporate business case where procrastination may or may not be a good thing. Then we'll get into the psychology of procrastination a little bit, talking about the root cause of why we do this as human beings. Beyond that, we're going to segue and talk a little bit about reframing our perception of procrastination and talk about potential benefits that we might have and then how we would execute that if we think that a task is relevant for strategic procrastination. And then we'll wrap up with key takeaways and questions. So getting into our definition, the OED defines procrastination very simply as noun, the action of delaying or postponing something. One thing I really want to foot stomp and highlight here is the idea that there is no judgment assigned to this. It's just simply the act of delaying something, whether good or bad. However, we all know that we hear all the time the social perception of procrastination being a negative thing. We talk about how it's bad for workplace efficiency, the kind of deliverables that we generate for our clients, how that can get in the way of it. We hear idioms and motivational statements about overcoming it all the time. A couple that I have here, the very first one, it's the job that's never started is takes longest to finish. That's by J.R.R. Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings. And the second one I have up here is a little bit more contemporary, and I challenge anyone in the audience to let me know the originator for this one. Do it, just do it. Don't let your dreams be dreams. Anybody? Not Bob Ross. Okay, no one knew that one. All right. That is 8-time Teen Choice Award winner Shia LaBeouf. Really shocked no one got that one. But I want to wrap up with one final one. This is by the famous author Mark Twain. Everybody's heard of Mark Twain. This is a 150-year-old quote where he really summarizes the core idea of procrastination and what it entails. And it's the idea that overcoming procrastination, the secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret to getting started is breaking down your complex, overwhelming tasks into smaller, manageable ones, and then starting at the first one. So talking about the negative side of procrastination as we just kind of started diving into, the first thing we need to address with that is the idea of a mindset, that ultimately the reason why we procrastinate as human beings is it's a negative mindset. So if you are the kind of person that has these kinds of inclinations, the very first thing you need to do, as with any problem, is admit that you have a problem. If you're the kind of person who procrastinates and it affects your workplace efficiency, self-identify as that. And then the next thing you need to do is be really introspective and ask yourself, what am I procrastinating and why am I procrastinating? Maybe it's some big PowerPoint deck that you have for the client, but you need to drill down a little deeper and find out maybe it's some technical component that you're unfamiliar with, and that's why you're putting it off, is because you're unsure and you're not confident about it. One of the other key things that gets overlooked really often with procrastination is to resist the idea of self-shaming. You know, we do this, we procrastinate something, we feel anxiety or guilt about it after the fact. You start shaming yourself, you have those negative emotions, and then ironically, you create a cycle where to avoid those negative emotions, you procrastinate addressing it, and it creates this vicious cycle. In order to break that cycle, the very first thing you need to do is to address that you are procrastinating, forgive yourself for it, and then move on. Getting into a couple of more proactive tips and tools for procrastination. We're not going to talk through all of these, but I'd like you to read through these as I talk through a couple. And let me know at the end if there's any that you employ regularly with your work habits, or if there's any that aren't listed here that you like to use as well. But first two I want to talk to, because they're polar opposites, are Eat the Frog and Motivation Snowball. I think Alex Kanachi addressed a couple of these at his Lunch and Learn that he did back in January. But the reason I want to talk about these is because they're polar opposites, but depending on the person and the situation, they can be equally as relevant and effective. So the idea with Eat the Frog is that you have a list of tasks in front of you. They're ranging from, easy to hard, and maybe something that's less time intensive, more time intensive. Where do you get started? The Eat the Frog technique says that you take the biggest, most daunting challenge, get that one out of the way first, and then everything else seems easier and smaller in comparison. Contrast that with the idea of the Motivation Snowball, and it's the idea that you have the same list of tasks, but you start with the easiest, smallest one, and this is really effective when you have a hard time getting started at all. You knock those easy ones out of the way, you start feeling good about yourself, confident, you build momentum, and then you build up that momentum to take on the more daunting tasks later on. The one that I personally use all the time, and it seems very obvious, but it's really effective, is detailed scheduling. So when I was at American Water on my skill bridge, I had a lot of different competing priorities in front of me. I was prepping for my PMP exam. I was working on 3 different projects at American Water at the time. I was looking at job applications and then taking on a couple other miscellaneous certifications as well. And with those competing priorities, it was really hard to figure out what I should be working on at any given time. So I want to present a situation, and people tell me if this sounds accurate to you at all. Let's say you're going into the day, you have a to-do list, it's only 6 items. It seems really, reasonable and manageable. You get to the end of the day and you realize that you only accomplished 1 or 2 of those things. And you're thinking to yourself, like, how did this happen? It was going to be easy to get done, but I only got 1 or 2 things done. If you naturally, have those inclinations for procrastination, what might have happened is that you started out your day saying, I have all the time in the world to get these things done, and then 4 p.m. hits and you realize you've got nothing done, and you scramble in the last hour or two to get those things done. What detailed scheduling allows you to do is that you break down that personal time to work on these things, and it's a lot easier to hold yourself accountable to get things done when you have a time block associated with it. So for example, what I did at American Water is that I would say, hey, from 11 to 11:30, I'm doing, PMI study hall for my PMP prep. From 11:30 to noon, I've got a meeting with the client. From noon to 1, lunchtime, 1 o'clock, right back into PMI study hall. And then the last one I want to talk to you that's really practical. We all know that we get distracted by our phones, social media, the internet all the time. So the idea being that with your phone and how big of a distraction it can be, there are ways that we combat that so that you're not getting distracted. A couple of them that I have listed here are Freedom, Cold Turkey, Opal, and Block. These are different apps that you can download on your phone that will quite literally lock you out of apps that are distracting you. So the idea being that if you're the kind of person who's scrolling Reddit, incessantly during the workday, Instagram, TikTok, whatever your preferred vice is, it quite literally locks you out of that. Also, it's very simple, but do not disturb and focus settings. If it's the notifications that are distracting you, your mom is texting you, or your wife or girlfriend or husband or whoever is hitting you up and it's not anything urgent, that takes you out of the workflow that you're working on. And then very simply, you can turn your phone off. You can just leave it in another room as well, and that's effective. Does anyone else have anything up here that resonates with them, anything that they use or something that's not even listed that they want to contribute?
I do want to eat the frog one for me is that I think biggest might be relative. It might be something that's very small but unpleasant. So maybe it really is just that 5-minute conversation with your boss or your employee. You can avoid it that's hanging over your head all day. So your eat the frog task might also be a 2-minute rule task.
Yeah.
But until you get it done, you're just going to have that hanging over your head. It's going to slow you down.
I like that a lot too, because how many times do we have that happen, right? You have something on your to-do list for maybe weeks, months at a time. Then you finally do it and you're like, that was not that difficult. I should have done that instead of having all this stress hanging over me.
Detailed scheduling, I've never used it, but I know a lot of people put down like heads down time on their calendars, which is, I guess they're to your point, to eliminating distractions. Don't bother me. That's an idea.
Yeah. All right.
One thing I'd add, and this kind of relates to Matt Williams' presentation on habit forming, and I've been doing that a little bit with an application that tries to help you build habits by letting you check them off each day to do something like maybe you put off like you want to do push-ups every day and you track that. I think one of the advantage of the habit aspect is once you start to build up, you've done it 30 times, 50 times, then there's that extra motivation that you've just created that you don't want to start over in the process of the habit. So,
yep.
I think personally there's a lot of ways you can think about that. Then also from a work perspective, if there's something every day at work, spend 15 minutes or 30 minutes on professional development, you could do something like that.
Absolutely.
We give a question online.
Sure. Let me see, is that?
It's Dan Burns.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, the EOS breaks up tasks in terms of what rocks are, meaning the most valuable activity you can have for a 3-month period. And so that's another way, at least 30% of your time, according to EOS, should be involved with focusing on the rocks, the important, valuable tasks. So that's all.
Awesome. All right, so now that we're talking about the negative side of things, I want us to start reframing how we're thinking about, procrastination solely as a negative thing. So starting off, I have a little Menti poll here. I want to clarify upfront, there is no right or wrong for this whatsoever. I'm not trying to influence answers. I'm just curious for a poll of the audience. But here's a hypothetical situation, and I'm curious how people would tackle this. So the idea that, here's the hypothetical, let's say you're tasked with a lunch and learn. Maybe it's about strategic procrastination, and you're working on initial research for that. You have several ideas for how you want to structure it. So what are you more likely to do at this point in time? Are you more likely to strategically procrastinate, come up with more ideas? Or are you more likely to keep actively researching and organizing? I'll leave this up for a minute here, but I like this. We're getting about 50-50, which again, this is kind of what I was saying. I want to have good debate and discussion about this because it's not a right or wrong thing. It's different, different strokes for different folks with what works for people's work habits. I'm almost starting to wonder if people are deliberately trying to make it 50-50 now. All right, cool. We got some good feedback there. I want us to keep this in the back of our minds as we start segueing into the positive benefits of procrastination potentially. And then we'll come back and see if anyone has kind of changed their minds about this a little bit. So the corporate business case I want to present an idea of revolves around Lehman Brothers. I think most people here are familiar with, sorry?
Not doing they did, yeah.
So Lehman Brothers, I think most people are familiar with. They were one of the largest global financial firms in the world up until the mid-2000s. And then we know kind of what happened with Lehman Brothers. But through my research, I found this really interesting anecdote revolving around October of 2005, when then president of the company, a guy named Joe Gregory, decided that he wanted to hold a symposium for all the executives of the company revolving around decision making. So to that end, he brought in all of these sociologists, authors, psychologists. He wanted to talk to the executives about how Lehman Brothers culturally could make the best decisions possible. So they brought in all these people to give talks, and the capstone was held by the author Malcolm Gladwell, who had just authored his book, Blink. And the core idea of Blink is that when faced with a task, a challenge, a question, go with your gut reaction. He called it the first 2 seconds, that whatever comes into your brain in the first 2 seconds is likely the correct answer. Joe Gregory loved this idea so much that he immediately bought thousands of copies of the book and disseminated them to everyone in the company, ranging from those executives down to traders on Wall Street. We know 3 years later what happened with Lehman Brothers. They declared bankruptcy in the wake of the global financial crisis of 2008. And afterwards, a lot of journalists reached out to these same executives to do a business postmortem to ask really what went wrong with Lehman Brothers. And consistently, the responses that they got about the culture of the workplace from these executives, they said that Lehman Brothers had a culture of excessive risk-taking, growth at all costs, and short-term prioritization. So in this way, this culture that they developed where they prioritize making those gut, knee-jerk reactions to situations, at least partially contributed to their downfall, ultimately. Any comments on the Lehman Brothers example or anything anyone finds interesting?
I mean, Lehman Brothers went out because the government didn't bail them out.
Correct, that as well. Correct. And
Lehman Brothers, that's subprime lending, right?
Yep.
They start off innocently enough, right? And then they saw the profits, and they went after it. It was instant risk, instant gratification. They were churning.
Yep.
And no one was thinking strategically about
Exactly.
taking the company. And in a blink of an eye, they were insolvent, and nobody wanted to foot that bill.
That wasn't unique to them, though. Like, subprime was like the entire industry.
Correct.
They
And
went out because the government bailed them out.
They were the first
Yeah.
to show the signs.
They weren't also a strong merger candidate. Like, that was so large, there wasn't a bank you could integrate them with and have TARP
That
money
was
to
a fire
spare.
sale.
And so they were an easy write-off.
but that is accurate. It's not that they were unique in this regard. I'm sure they were not the only company, obviously, as we know, in the world that had these kinds of practices in the culture. But still, it helped contribute to kind of their ultimate downfall. Instead of the idea of thinking strategically, thinking long range, but instead they prioritized those short-term gains. And again, the excessive risk-taking, growth at all costs.
We do have a comment on
Sure.
online, Jim.
Yeah, I think the other thing, it's been a while since I read Blink, but they may have misunderstood it because for that to work, you had to be like an expert. And so having everyone in the company operate that way when they may not be an expert is not probably going to be successful. So that may have also caused some of their problems of not quite understanding what he was getting at.
No, and I love that comment, and that's actually great because it reminded me of something I forgot to mention, is that probably likely what happened is there are some really good insights from the book, and kind of what they took and ran with kind of took it beyond the original scope of what Malcolm Gladwell was arguing for. So I think it was probably a bastardized version of the interpretation of that book and the message in it. So now kind of getting into the psychology of again, continuing to shift our perspective on how we think about procrastination. Everything we've talked to up until now is this left-hand column of the root causes. Why do people procrastinate? It's because of laziness. It's because they don't want to do something, poor time management skills, and it really just has that mindset involved of, I just don't want to. So what I would challenge with, and I bet this will sound very familiar to a lot of people in the audience, is the ideas on the right for why you might delay something and why you might not want to take on a project or a task right off the bat. Maybe you're being put in charge of something where there's a vague goal. You don't even know what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe there's unclear requirements about what you're supposed to do. Maybe there's not a plan for it and you're not the person tasked with coming up with a plan. These are all valid reasons why you might delay and wait to make a chief decision on something. And really, ultimately, what we need to ask ourselves in these kinds of situations is, can value be added by delaying? Are there potential benefits to delaying and strategically procrastinating? So let's talk about some of those potential benefits right here. Again, similar to the tips for the non-productive non-productive procrastination, I'm not going to talk through all of these, but there are a couple that I want to highlight. The first being that a potential benefit is that strategic procrastination may help you make better decisions. So going back to the Lehman Brothers example, we talk about the rationality versus your intuition. Lehman Brothers leaned heavily into the intuition of going with their gut instinct on everything. But we have these situations all the time, right, where you're given a task and your brain is telling you one thing and your gut or your heart is telling you another thing, and you don't know which is the correct one. A lot of times in those situations, one of the best things you can do is table that decision for the time being, sleep on it, maybe solicit some expert advice, and then come back the next day and you'll have a clearer picture that you'll realize, hey, I was feeling emotional in the moment. I need to go with the facts and logic that my head was telling me. Or maybe you realize that gut instinct that I had was the right decision. The next one, talking about below that, is that it may help eliminate unnecessary effort and rework. So this ties back into what we talked about, that you're given a task that has unclear requirements, an unclear definition of done. In those situations, you can bite off on that immediately and start investing all this time and effort and work into whatever that problem is. Maybe somebody comes back and clarifies the parameters later on, and you realize that all that work that you did in the first place became irrelevant now. What would have been the more efficient thing to do is to table that, work on something more pressing, and then to come back later with clearer requirements. And then the final one, because I really like this one that I found with the research. We hear this cliche with procrastinators all the time, the idea that I do my best work under pressure, right? And a lot of times that's a cop-out for poor time management skills. The funny thing is, there is actually some research done on this, and there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And what they found through this research is the idea that for every person with their work that they do, there is a spectrum where there's an optimal level of pressure that's exerted on someone that yields their best result. So going back to Adam Grant with being a procrastinator, the idea that he doesn't need that external pressure put on him to deliver a good product. But for some people, that threat of a deadline actually makes them more creative and helps them come up with the best version of their product in the long run.
Did they have any indication of a way to figure out who you are?
It's funny because it actually says trial and effort in different examples, and it said to look at your work that you do, that an academic example would be you had a paper in college or something about doing the Adam Grant thing of trying to do that paper early, look at your writing and see how effective it is, if it gets the point across, and then versus the idea of deliberately procrastinate. The caveat with that one though is you still need to leave enough time to deliver a decent product. You can't wait until literally an hour before something is due and expect a good result. Charlie?
It's a very tempting thing to say, and it might even be true about all of us to some extent, that we work well under pressure, but as a leader or as a hired consultant someone's paying for, I think it's best to keep that under one's hat and not say, oh, I work best under pressure, because
Yep.
it just pisses people off.
Yeah.
It doesn't build any confidence in anyone, even if it's true. So I've always found that to be a really bad explanation someone gives, even though maybe valid.
Yeah.
That's kept in your own head.
Yep.
Tell them it's a better explanation for it. I'm sorry about something that I want to wait until I'm under pressure.
So it's funny, we'll touch on that a little more on one of the later slides, that idea of that negative social perception and how you communicate that effectively so that someone doesn't think you just have bad work habits.
It certainly also brings up a good point from a leadership perspective. There's the bullet.
Yep.
If you come up with a great decision at the last minute and you want to implement, right, there's still a whole chain of people that need to get in line to execute, and they may not receive information as quickly as you need them to because they are going through their own processes.
Yep.
So if you have a chain of procrastinators, it's very hard to meet any deadlines.
Yep. That's a really great point too. When we talk about, different precedents and, prerequisites for getting work done, dependencies, that kind of thing, it really kind of screws over the next person in line to do that work if you're waiting till the last minute potentially. So ultimately, as we're considering these potential benefits, ultimately we're thinking towards what is going to lead to a better, more efficient product in the end. Maybe it is doing it earlier with a lot of lead time. Maybe it's delaying a little bit. Any other thoughts that people have for anything that's not listed here, or anything that I didn't talk about that you want to highlight or emphasize potentially that maybe you've seen in your own life?
I think one thing I keep in mind is a lot of people do operate this way. So that's where when we're in a position of governance roles or even internally here, it's like setting artificial deadlines sometimes can help because it allows people to procrastinate to a point where it's not a threat of delaying the go live or something like that. But you can still hold people accountable. Like even these lunch and learns, I think I saw you give this presentation like
Back in June, yeah.
Like that, and that's because we set like a deadline. Now you might have waited until, a half hour before or something.
You can bet I was doing edits this morning.
It was early enough that we could adjust it.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the idea that ultimately everything is a balance, right? There's not, and Adam Grant even kind of showed that at the beginning, that you do something too urgently and too early, it's not going to be great. You're going to be kind of panicky. And then same thing if you wait till the last possible minute. Mitch?
Yeah, I think that has to do with stress hormone. Cortisol is like if you're getting something, you're freaking out initially, you're very tunnel vision. You may be able to get it done, but you're not creative. And then you wait too long, and the stress hormone starts going up again. You need that creativity. You got to find that.
Exactly. Yep.
I think the other key too, and we kind of touched on it, is you have to have meaningful and accurate deadlines, whether they're artificial created or not. If your deadline in your head doesn't give everyone down the line time to react, or it doesn't give the client time to give you feedback and work on it, or whatever that is, procrastination, strategic procrastination requires accurate deadlines. You have to really understand the second and third order effects.
Cool. And I see Tyler, I think, has a comment. He's got his hand raised online as well.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I love procrastination. I use it all the time. And I think with that bullet of utilizing your subconscious mind, right? So the way I approach that is when I get the task early on, I'll probably schedule like a 30-minute block to like dive deep into the details and really figure out what I don't know and what I do know. And then maybe give it a couple days and schedule some more time. And by, a couple days later, my subconscious has worked on it enough where I kind of have a better idea of what I need to approach and what I need to go figure out.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that a little more too. The reason I skipped over that one is that there's going to be an entire kind of slide talking about that here shortly. And last comment.
I think that's a really good point, especially because a lot of the times the tasks aren't necessarily ours to create, so we're not the only ones who are ideating on what they should look like, right? Like the client who might come up with it and say, hey, that's a great idea, like let's go ahead and do that. If you launch into that and start creating that project, well, the person who came up with the idea is also subconsciously ideating on it too, right? And might come back with not that rock or the other rock.
Yep.
And that's how you end up in that situation. So you can kind of put yourself in a better position too if you wait for them to also flush out the idea of what it is you're actually making.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to the whole requirements thing of if you wait until you have 100% requirements necessarily, it might be too late that you've delayed too long. But if you jump too early, you might waste all this time on rework that needs done later. So it's that happy balance. So let's say now we're starting to understand that there could be some potential benefits, especially in creative endeavors, things that require innovation. Let's say I've convinced you, maybe at least half convinced you, and this is something you might want to employ. There's been a lot of research done as well as to how you would employ strategic procrastination to realize these potential benefits. So starting off, kind of a mental preparation for what we want to do in the first place. The first one being, if you're going to do this, don't try to multitask it. Going back to Tyler's comment about the subconscious processing it, the way our brains are literally engineered and designed is that the idea that we can focus on one thing in the background at any given time. If you have 3 big creative endeavors and you're trying to juggle those in the back of your brain is only going to pick the one that it deems to be the biggest threat and process that one. So just pick one to go through. The next one is being honest about the situation. We really should only be considering this if it's a situation that requires a creative answer, a unique idea for something. Sometimes the work just needs to be done. You're given a bunch of data and you need to generate an Excel spreadsheet on it. I deal with that a lot of times recently, especially at work. That's not something where you need creative ideating. You just need to do the work, and you need to be honest about that. One of the other things, and I really love this, is the idea that if you're going to step away from something, you need to understand the requirements and the parameters to begin with. So you have a big task that you're looking at. Before walking away from it, you should look into it and figure out what are some of those basic deadlines, what are the basic requirements if they do exist, what are who are the people that are involved in this, and that's going to be the information that allows your mind to wander eventually and then develop these potential benefits. The next thing we need to do is we don't want to make sure we're procrastinating indefinitely and we never come back to the work. So we need to identify how we're going to come back to the work. And that can be an alarm. That could be literally an alarm on your phone for, I'm going to come back to this in an hour. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Or it might be a return trigger. In the case of the unclear requirements example, maybe you're standing by an email from some key stakeholder who's going to clarify and elaborate on what those requirements are. And then that's your cue to return to the work. And going back to Charlie's point here, the communication piece is really key. That if you're going to do this, you need to be really careful about how you communicate this to potential clients or other team members working on something. So you don't want to go and just say, hey, I'm not doing that right now. I'm putting it off. I'm going to ignore that for now. You want to just say, hey, I'm taking time to table this. I want to process it. I want to sleep on it. Maybe I want to talk to a couple people and solicit their advice on it. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we have the ability to capture those fleeting thoughts as they come in, as our brain is subconsciously processing that, and we're getting those little ideas in our head. We want to make sure we don't forget them. So having some kind of note app on your phone or a little physical notebook to write those ideas down in. Now for the more actual employment of what we're going to do, there's a couple different approaches. One here is by a sociologist by the name of John Perry, and he calls this structured procrastination. And the idea that we're going to work on things that are still productive while we're procrastinating that bigger task that's, percolating in the back of our minds. But maybe it's something that's really low cognitive, as he calls it. The idea that we take our inbox for our email and we're going to organize that or, categorize it different ways. Something that we're not really thinking that critically about. And that's going to be what allows your mind to wander, but you're still being productive in the foreground. We can contrast this with a less structured approach. This one's a little more fluid, but this is if time allows for it. I wouldn't recommend doing this a lot during the workday. Or maybe you're doodling, you're sketching something, you're working from home, you pick up your guitar and you start playing a little bit. That's also going to allow your mind to wander. We just want to make sure we're not doing this excessively in inappropriate times. Another huge thing, the idea of trying to utilize time that previously was not constructive. So maybe that's on your commute, as you're stuck in bumper to bumper traffic on 76 to and from work like I am pretty often. Maybe it's time that you're at the gym and now you're thinking about that big project that you have going on. Opting for a change in scenery is also really effective. A lot of times people will be out in the cubicle farm and you're sitting there, you're getting distracted, you've got writer's block for some kind of deliverable you're working on. Something that can be really effective, pick up your laptop, leave the office, go to Starbucks or Panera Bread, and the research shows that you can be really surprised by that physical change in scenery leading to a significant change in your mental state. We need to be comfortable as well with the idea that dismissing ideas can be productive. So maybe you have a big task in front of you, and the problem is you have too many ideas. You have 5 different courses of action in front of you. You don't know which one makes the most sense. If you step away from it, you let your brain start to subconsciously process that. Maybe you realize 3 of those COAs are not good fits for the problem at hand. That's actually now extremely productive because you have 2 remaining good ideas, and you just need to figure out which one is the better of those 2 remaining ones. The other thing that we're looking for here is the idea that we're not looking for these big, Newton sitting under an apple tree, getting hit in the head, eureka kind of thing. We're looking for just like a little, hey, what if we did this, And as Steve Jobs put it, a crappy first draft or an ugly prototype. And he had this idea that he was famous for, the idea of what he called noodling, where he would block off time in his schedule to play around with these, ugly prototypes or crappy rough drafts. And this is how he was able to iterate and come up with some of the best ideas that Apple had that put them on the forefront of being technological pioneers and being successful. As much as we would all love to block off 3 hours of our schedule every day to just kind of goof off, we can't really do that. So this ties back more into the idea of trying to utilize that previously non-productive time. And then very simply, the last one that I have here, sometimes you just need to sleep. Sometimes you're just exhausted. You just need to turn it off and back on again, look at something with fresh eyes the next day, and then suddenly you're way more efficient and everything makes sense. Any other ideas that people have for any of these, or again, any that you don't agree with potentially?
You can do it. Not just like working out, do like a very hard workout where you get like a high endorphin rush that lowers your stress levels.
Yeah, that's a great point too, of like the physiological side too, not even just giving yourself time to think about it, but you're having that physiological reaction that's going to help you think clearer.
I was just gonna say on the start small and iterate. I mean, you can crappy first draft is great, but I mean the amount of times like I have a lot of writing. The amount of times I put the document and put a header on it, saved it, closed it, and walked away, and like, hey, I started.
Yeah.
I think that can be so. I think some people procrastinate finishing things, some people procrastinate starting, and everything in between. But the power of just saying I started.
Yep. That's huge. Again, that's that motivation snowball. You know, you got something done and you just start feeling positive, you know, thoughts about yourself and what you're working on. All right, as we wrap this up, a couple key takeaways. If you don't remember anything else, this is probably the most important stuff. But first and foremost, if you have a problem with that non-productive procrastination, make sure you're being honest with yourself. Make sure you're leveraging some of those tips and tools that we talked about today to increase your workplace productivity and efficiency. The next one being that if you're going to try to employ the strategic procrastination, be honest with the situation, be honest with yourself, and make sure that it actually makes sense to do that. You need to figure out what exactly is the solution here, what's the key issue to be solved. Then you want to make sure that you're being intentional at all times, because again, it can be that pitfall of, I'm just going to table this, I don't have a plan to come back to it, I don't have a plan for how I'm going to realize those potential benefits. Make sure you're being deliberate, make sure you're communicating it clearly with other stakeholders and team members involved. And then lastly, strive for self-awareness and honesty with yourself at all times. If you are the kind of person who has issues with that non-productive procrastination, maybe this just is not a good tactic or a technique. Maybe this is a slippery slope where it's not going to be something effective for you. All right, cool. Well, thank you everyone very much for your time. Well.